Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it. As an introduction to our audience, Jeff is one of the founding team members of Booking.com and Priceline. He's an award-winning author of a book, Scale, focused on scaling your startup. And he's also the chairman of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, among many other companies that he has led in his incredible career. And of course, advises and sits on the board of many companies as well. So he can give us insight from both kind of the entrepreneurial experience as well as kind of from an investor or board member and senior seasoned business professional. Jeff, thanks for joining us for this series. As a bit of context, we as Arabnet have been doing conferences, and we're one of the first conference organizers in the Middle East in 2010. And since COVID started, we felt it was important for us to think about how this will change the world. And we believe that the change to the world will not be incremental. It will be massively disruptive and transformational. And so hence the theme of our sessions, which is unlocking the new world. We believe that the world we're entering into is a different one than the world that we left. And we also want to think about the new opportunities that are going to emerge in this new world, because there will be huge opportunities that are going to come out of this massive disruption. And so the context of that. But I'd like to kick off a little bit with your sense of the coronavirus and what it means for the global economy. And because I know that this is a huge question, I'm going to qualify it a little bit. You've been through booms and busts before, you've been through ups and downs. I want to ask you kind of, what would you compare this to, if anything? And if you think this is kind of a once in a decade, a once in a generation, once in a century type disruption that we're living through, if you could give us a little bit of color to the size of the disruption that you expect.
Sure.
And what you might compare it to.
Okay, so sure. Well, to begin with, I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. So, we have been through from, 9/11 to wars to economic recessions, a lot of different things, but nothing in anybody's memory now that was this global and this impactful. So no, it's not like anything else. Let's talk about two things: the impact and then in the future. The impact, we still don't even know, but I completely agree with you, Omar, that the impact is going to be absolutely huge. And it's going to be absolutely huge, both positively and negatively. The negative is pretty obvious. Many, many industries, well, first of all, small businesses and startups, a lot of them, unfortunately, cannot survive this. They live on cash flow. They don't have cash reserves, and we're going to lose a lot of small businesses in the process. In many countries where restaurants are closed, they're not going to survive. Again, they don't have the cash flow if they can't serve people. But it's true of so many small businesses whose products are non-essential. But even major industries, there's going to be a huge impact. So we didn't even have this term WFH in the world, working from home. That wasn't even an acronym really that anybody knew except a tiny bit of the population. And now everybody types on their online status WFH, working from home. So overnight, many, many industries and businesses that have never done teleworking, online working, screen sharing, Zoom calls, any of these things, they never did it before. And they all had to learn how to do two things. One, to just operate in a virtual mode, and two, try their best to deliver their products and services in a virtual mode. So that's the upside, is that every industry that's around technology, that's around virtual work technology, and if you're not, it's an opportunity to get into that, to think through what are all the tools you need for people to be able to work more effectively in a virtual environment. Because a lot of companies are saying that, wow, we didn't know how effective this was, and we don't have to be together as much and travel as much as we did in the past when this whole pandemic is over. So there is a big opportunity to rethink virtual servicing and virtual work, and to get in that field if you weren't in that field before. The negative of that is pretty obvious. That, for example, I was giving a report recently that I don't think the travel industry ever comes back to where it was. for the reason that we just said. So travel is an example. People are going to discover the effectiveness of virtual work, and they're not going to travel as much. Then that has a ripple effect, for example, the automobiles, right? If more people learn to work at home, less people will buy cars, which means there's more opportunity for companies to get into the, not only the shared transportation business, but the deliver things to your home business, because people will be in the office less. So, for every dark cloud, there's always a silver lining. The impact will be devastating on some industries because they won't come back to where they were, but it'll create whole new industries. Let me just add one thing before we move on. You said, will something like this ever happen again? And the truth is, that's not the most important fact right now. The most important fact is that people think it might. As off guard as so many businesses, citizens, and governments were, they were caught off guard when this happened, and the word unprepared is everywhere. So many people are saying, I won't let this happen to me again. And people have, fears of things like biowarfare, I keep hearing. What if someone does this on purpose in the future? So I don't think the world's ever the same, because I think people will act as though this could happen again, and they'll prepare themselves. If something like this ever does occur again, they won't be blindsided.
Amazing. Actually, you jumped a bunch of questions. So just as a heads up, the things I'm going to move now to this question, which is the changing consumer behavior. And then I'm going to come back to the impact it's had on startups, fundraising, and questions around your advice to startups. But since we've segued already, I'd like to know a bit more what type of consumer behaviors you expect to stick and what will not. You've already mentioned one, which is travel. I'm curious if you think we will go back to schools, if we'll go to conferences again, if we will hold hands and hug again our neighbors. And certainly for me, that hug and hold hands, it might be personal, but I think the question around schools is really important for people, or conferences, events. For us, live events, is that an industry that's never going to come back? What are the other industries that you think really are probably never going to come back? And at the same time, the flip side, what are some of the emerging opportunities that are maybe less obvious, right? Food delivery, work from home, these are going to be opportunities, but already people have swooped in to capture those. But they're going to be knock-on effects, like you said. If if I'm working from home, I'm going to need maybe other things to happen. Maybe there's going to be, you mentioned already, the distrust might lead to a boom in cybersecurity or different kinds of security. That's going to be knock-on effects. So what are maybe some of the industries that will not come back, and some that you think of the less obvious opportunities that might emerge?
Sure. So let's start with some of those that won't come back all the way, and they are indeed the ones you hit on. The world, well, let's do three, because I think these are the three biggest. Education is the first one. Again, a lot of schools, universities, educations at many level were not equipped to do online learning. They didn't have the tool set, and so now they have all this downtime, right? They have a lot more time with students not in a classroom that they are, and I've talked to so many educators, that they are figuring this out now, and they're accessing the tools. And per the opportunity, new companies are pivoting. We'll talk about that for startups in a minute, and saying, man, I should jump into online education because everybody's looking for tools now. So there's a whole slew of new tools coming out, and educators and educational institutions figuring out how to use it. I think that whether the schools like it or not, on the far end, the parents and the students are going to say, do I really need to go sit in a classroom all this time, or do I need to go away for a 4-year type of degree, because I've discovered so many ways to educate myself online with virtual access to professors and educators. So I don't think it ever comes back all the way, because I think a lot of people are going to say online learning is powerful, and I don't know if I have to be there anymore. And I think people will jump on that, and there'll be more online schools than there ever were before, and people will use them. So I'm not sure that comes back. In the same way, like you said, conferences. When we find we can be effective.
Unfortunately, that's our industry. So we're gonna be. I'm very interested in your thoughts on this one personally.
Sure, because the virtual. But here's the good news. Although Bebon was a huge conference, for the most part, most people are, you're limited geographically and physically on the number of people, of customers that you can bring in for physical conferences. And while there are obvious huge benefits, and I believe, of course, we will go back to live events, I think that the opportunity, once people get comfortable with, because before, not all the customers, not all the educators and event companies and institute and entities like yourself were comfortable hosting virtual events, and you will have learned it during these months. And not all customers felt that they were comfortable going to them. And what's going to happen on the tail end of this is you're going to be able to sell to massive global audiences because they don't need to fly there, and they don't need the expense, and they don't have to come. So I think virtual conferences and virtual learning events are going to be a huge opportunity. It's going to be good news because you can service way more people virtually than you can physically. But I still believe we're going to have live events because there's people now around the world that are just, staring at the clock, waiting for this to be over so they can get back to face-to-face demos and handshaking and hugging. It's just not going to be the same percentage of the population. So that's education. The other obvious one that we're seeing is healthcare. We're seeing that our healthcare workers all over the world, our first responders, don't have enough safety equipment and emergency equipment to test people, to check people, to deal with people. Transporting people to hospitals. Some people might be elderly and home alone and don't have a way to get there. The doing everything physically in a doctor's office in a hospital. Telemedicine was already started, and now it just got a massive turbo boost. We will find many startups and many big companies finding more ways to monitor yourself at home, to monitor your elderly relatives that you can't get to and they can't help themselves, to self-diagnose using technology in the home, to use online tools like this to talk to doctors and exchange records and have them diagnose you. We'll have in-home monitors that the doctors can read your vitals over the internet. So the telemedicine, the online health, and more importantly, the at-home healthcare and preventative care and testing, those are huge because the world has shown we weren't doing a good job of those yet. So healthcare is the other big one. Let me just close with the third one that I think that we also hit on a little bit, which is I'm gonna make it even a little broader than just delivery services, but subscription services. So a lot of people found out that when there was suddenly a crisis and you had to try to physically go to a store and push and shove with everyone else, which is interesting enough because we're trying to avoid contact, but everybody's in the grocery store picking up and touching the same products, and for the most part, early on, pushing and shoving each other for toilet paper. So not only is home delivery going to be bigger, but subscription services. So, anyone in consumer goods, think about that. You offer a subscription so that I get a monthly box of toilet paper delivered to my home or whatever it is, or hand cleaner or clean wipes or whatever it is. Delivery of products that are already regularly scheduled and already coming to my home so that if I do need product, I don't have to go out and look for it, especially at the last minute. So those are all areas of opportunity where we're going to see change and we're going to see growth.
Amazing, amazing. I'm going to switch a little gears and here talk about the startups and how they are kind of responding to this. And I'm going to start actually with a small quote from the New York Times, an article that they published 2 days ago. And I quote, "In just a few weeks, more than 50 startups have cut or furloughed roughly 6,000 employees, according to a tally by the New York Times. Plans for IPOs are on hold, and funding is drying up for many young tech companies." Of course, there is the corollary of this, which is that companies in online education or gaming, we had a session 2 days ago with an online education and a gaming company who said they weren't able to keep up. They're really finding massive new demand for their services and products. What would be your advice to startups in this environment? First, to the startups that are struggling, and second, to the startups that are finding they have a moment here. Okay,
so I'm going to share what I've been calling, and Omar, I've been talking literally in these weeks to hundreds of startups, and in fact, all over the world. That's normally what I do for a living anyways, mentor startups, but they're all reaching out. So I'm hearing the worries, but I'm also hearing the ones that are seizing opportunities. So let's talk about that. As a result of what I've been hearing, I've created for startups what I call my 3 R's for startups and small businesses: repurpose, retool, and redeploy. And let's talk about that first one, repurpose. If you cannot sell your existing product, or you just weren't there yet, but you're in many startups, like you said, are in an environment where they have to furlough people because they don't have revenue coming in, and they don't have revenue coming in because whatever their product was, it's non-essential right now. So it's not something people are buying. So they're kind of on hold indefinitely, and they're furloughing their employees. Repurpose is the function of doing this. Assess the skills of your team, assess the capabilities of your startup, and assess your resources. Then go out and look at the war on COVID-19 on the battlefront around where you are in your community, whatever country you're in, whatever city, and do a mapping, right? I've done this with some companies on a whiteboard. What are our core skills and capabilities and resources? What are the problems? I'm going to give you an example in a minute. What are the problems that need to be solved? And can we repurpose ourselves for however long it takes so that we're not doing nothing? So here's the example. It's a small startup that I mentor. They built a distillery. They were getting into the flavored liquor and drinks in the United States, flavored vodka or whatever it was. They couldn't deliver it because liquor stores are closed, and that's who buys from them in the US. So now they've got no revenue and a bunch of employees, chemists and tanks, and then they can't produce any product and make any money. So going through that exercise, our core skill set as chemists, what we do is we mix chemicals in big tanks to make products. And then when we looked around, when you map the problems in the world, one of the problems was not the world needs more hand sanitizer. So what they did was they said, wait a minute, isn't that just mixing alcohol and other chemicals in tanks with chemists? Yes, that's how it's made. So they repurposed their whole team and their actual facility from making vodka to making hand sanitizer. And now they can't keep up with the demand. They're making so much money. Everybody is ordering hand sanitizer all over the world. They're having to hire more people, and their startups never done better. So that's repurposing. Map your skills, look at the needs in the current environment, and ask if there's any way you could repurpose your workforce in your company to go do that. That's the first one, repurpose. Retool is an opportunity for startups. Now, granted, even if you furlough people, right? A lot of people are saying, I think I'm going to have to let everybody go for a while, but I'm hoping to bring them all back when this is over. It's not like there's some other place they can go get another job right now anyway, unfortunately. So what I've been telling startups is, in this interim, whether your people are still employed or not, this is the time to retool your startup. And what I mean by that is all these things we've been talking about, from subscription services to home delivery to virtual work, to the things you as a startup never really had time to look at because you were so busy. What is augmented reality? What is virtual reality? What is AI? How does facial recognition affect my business? Now is the time to educate your workforce and upgrade it. So here's the example. I was dealing with a consumer products company who no one wants to buy their product now because it's not critical. And so during this downtime, instead of doing nothing, what we've suggested is we've signed up their core team to take these free online artificial intelligence certification courses. So while they're home, they're getting certificates in new skills the company never had. And with these AI skills that they're getting from free online courses, they are creating a predictive behavior algorithm for their customers. So when they come back out of this, they're going to be way stronger and way smarter than they ever were before. So that's retool. And the last one is redeploy. Redeploy is, if you can't repurpose, if you can't find something else that you can repurpose your existing startup or small business to go do, then redeploy says this. You made that list of your team skills. Go out in your community and see who else might need those skills. And I'm going to give you an example. One of the companies, they're a software company, and their software is non-essential, so their customers stopped ordering software right now. And so they were saying, we can't find something to repurpose to go make, but redeploy was my advice. So in redeploying, they went out and looked at the companies fighting the battle against COVID, and they discovered that there were some healthcare companies that were trying to counter the disinformation. There's so much false information about this out there, and provide accurate information across their whole medical community to consumers. But they were doctors and not marketers. So the software company loaned their graphic designers and they loaned their online marketing team to this medical care company that had a grant. And so his whole staff isn't working from him, but they're all employed under this grant to help this hospital disseminate information and do online communications. He loaned them as graphic designers. He loaned them his online marketers. And in fact, they're all getting even paid something. But even if your team isn't getting paid, redeploying them and loaning them to help fight coronavirus is important, because sitting at home and being depressed and stressed, which is happening to people all over the world, changes dramatically when you're at home helping a hospital deliver medical, whatever it is. When you're part of the solution, you feel way more productive. It changes your whole outlook than when you're just unemployed and depressed. So even if you're volunteering your skills to redeploy yourself to those companies, you'll feel much better being part of the solution. Sorry for the long answer, but that was really important.
No, that's great. And I think it's a really strong, actionable insight that everyone in our audience can take with them and remember and implement. So thank you for that. I'll ask you my next question, staying on the theme of startups. How do you expect this to change the fundraising environment? Kind of in the short term and in maybe even the medium term. Do you think it'll change the type of companies that investors want in the medium term? And in the short term specifically, what is your advice to a startup that needs to raise money in the next 6 months?
Sure. So, I've been talking to many investors around the world at the same time, just because I wanted to hear the answer to that. So, I'm hearing a couple of pieces. We can't pretend that there's not bad news for a lot of startups. We're in the mid. I got numerous startups yesterday that said I was mid fundraise and we were going to close, that week. There are some people, unfortunately, not recovered. Let's focus on the good news, because the bad news is obvious. First of all, investors, the calls I'm getting are the companies that have repurposed to a new world, right? The companies that have created new online virtual learning platforms are in that space. All the things we talked about. People in the work from home space, people in the delivered goods to home space, people in the online education, online medicine, all these spaces, investors are calling and saying, who are the innovators in that space? Because those are going to be more important industries than they ever were before. As we previously said, everybody wants to know if I've seen great online education companies, because no one thinks schools will go 100% back to physical like they used to be. There might be schools that you go to class 3 days a week and 2 days you work virtually. So people that are thriving in those areas, investors are already looking for. Second, if you're not in those areas, by the way, there's another thing. Even what investors telling me they're impressed with is they're looking for your innovation and agility. So if you're that distillery that stopped making vodka and started making hand sanitizer, their investors are saying that is impressive agility. Even if you go back to making your core product, the fact that you are contributing in your community by redeploying and helping a hospital or repurposing to make healthcare products during this time, investors are looking for the companies who didn't just sit there, and feel bad for themselves, but that jumped in and tried to do something. That's important, even if it's volunteer work. And then there's another piece I'm kind of scoping down. The best case was they want to invest in you now. The middle case is they're going to consider your investment after this because they see how agile and involved you were. But there's a third case. And again, just being really transparent with our startups that are listening. Some investors are calling me and saying that given the current market, it's not different than global stock markets. Stocks are down, and market investors are saying this might be a good time to buy those stocks. They're saying the same thing about your startup. You were in the middle, you were trying to raise funds, or you are now at a certain valuation, and the financial markets are crushed. So a lot of investors are calling me and saying, I actually kind of want to buy now, because I could get a deal. And so again, let's be very transparent here. What they're looking for is a much better deal than you had on the table before coronavirus. So if you want to get funded and you don't want to wait it out, investors are saying, I think I can, buy more at the bottom of the market. You're going to have to give them a better deal. If it was an equity deal, they're going to ask for a bigger percent. But there are opportunities. And there are investors that are saying, this is my opportunity to get in and fund startups at a much lower price point. And while that's not what you wish, if you have to have some funding now, there are investors out there investing, but they're expecting to get great deals because of this current economic state. So that's what I've learned from talking to investors around the world.
Amazing. So I have two questions that have come in from the audience, which are kind of similar and touch on what we've said, what you said before. One, which is, and it's all related to the shift to digital. The first is, how do we make the virtual personal? Someone asked it just as, how do we make the digital personal? And someone asked it as, if I'm going to close a deal, historically, I close a deal face to face, right? And that's a really important thing when I'm selling. How do we replicate that in terms of, again, what I believe is, how do we make the virtual personal? That's on one end. And the other question that I'm getting is this really a forever, or is this a for now, right? Is the pivot or the repurpose just temporary until we get a vaccine, and then people are going to come back to what they were doing before? What do you expect? And would love to get your answer on both.
Sure. And let me put the big giant asterisk. I am not a doctor, so I'm just giving one person's opinion, but I've been talking to lots of them. I'm on the side of that this is a for now. We will get a vaccine. Things lots of things will come back. It'll be a new normal. Things won't return to normal. They'll return to the new normal. There will be more people that are just generally worried about things like this and more cautious than they've ever been. There will be people that even after this, for some much longer extended time, would rather talk to you virtually than shake your hand for whatever reason. There will be, though, the core of people in the world want to go back to face, shaking hands and being social again. So I think it's a for now, which means that a lot of companies that are redeployed and repurposed will be able to get back to their core business, unless, of course, this repurpose is a brand new is a pivot, right? Man, I can make way more money in the not the foreseeable future. I can stay in this. So some companies, some startups will consider this a pivot and will stay in their new business. Some will come back to what they were doing, and there will be this return to the new normal, and it will be a for now. So again, my answer is it'll be a mix. For some of us, it'll be a for now. For some people, some startups, this will be their pivot point. The second part of the question you asked, how do you make virtual more personal?
Yeah, and how does that, what does that mean for all the things that we really rely for the personal on? That like personal trust that we do, especially in selling. I think this is one of the biggest areas where the personal is really important.
Yeah, so I think that I mean, to some percentage of us will get back to the old personal, where we will get back to face, but I think you're going to be surprised. And some of the ones I saw recently, I'm actually not allowed to discuss yet, non-disclosures, but there are really smart people all over the planet Earth that are creating new technology right now to try to figure out exactly what you said. How do we make this experience more personal for the people that start to use virtual technology to close deals and to do things? So I think I think you're going to see better technology that feels more personal and enables us to engage more. I've already seen, oh man, I forgot what they call them, but it's a version of an avatar, but it doesn't look like an avatar. It literally looks like you in full 3D. It's a full 3D avatar of you and I, but now we're standing in a room together, and it'll never be the same as being human, but you and I will be able to take a walk through your office, and you can actually show me around, and I can invite you into my home, and you can walk around, and the other avatars are actually my family members, my employees, whatever it is. So there's technology, there's sort of 3D immersive technology that's being created now to make us feel closer the best we can. The other one I've been looking at that companies were already spending billions on was holography. I'll give you an example. Microsoft is making a multi-billion-dollar bet on a product called HoloLens, HOLOLENS. That's just one example. But it's a full 3D hologram of me that appears in your office. And again, it's not the same as me being there, but it's going to be a lot more personal than just a 2D video image like you and I have now. And you might be familiar with this same technology because some people that I know used it to do a virtual Elvis Presley concert and the rapper Tupac Shakur. They had them appear in concerts as holograms, and the concert sold out because people felt closest they felt to those people in a long time. So we will find improvements in technology to make virtual more personal.
And so maybe, and that's part of where maybe we'll see a boom in virtual reality and much more implementation of VR, which has kind of been a promise that hasn't delivered so much, except in, kind of limited gaming or entertainment contexts.
I completely agree. It's not been the business tool we'd hoped, and now there'll be a rush to get there.
Jeff, do you have a few more minutes? I have a lot of questions people are asking. If you can give us a few more minutes, we'd love that.
Yes, and can I ask you one more question? Can you have somebody at the end of this email me the chat? Because I know we won't get to all of them, but I'll try to reply to some other people on my own time afterwards.
Oh, would love that. And we would.
If someone can save the chat transcript, and I will add for our listeners as well. My email address is really easy. It's just jeff@jeffhoffman.com. So yeah, let's take a few of those questions, and then somebody email me the chat transcript, and I'll do my best.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving us more of your time, Jeff. So I have a question here that's about the tourism industry and the short-term rental market. And for me, I'll just expand that a little bit and talk about, thinking about co-working spaces or co-living or all of this massive trend that's happening today. What will be the fate of that entire industry that held so much promise?
Okay, so let's talk about it, because I've been talking to people in real estate from around the world. Let's talk about that, especially, so there's good news there. And especially as you get to a younger, more millennial generation, or whatever you want to call it. Here's what I am hearing. Home buying, long-term expense in the residential market, buying homes is going to take a hit. Right now it's taking a short-term hit, right? Because people don't want to make any big expenditure at this point. So we know I should have said that, right? We're taking a short-term hit in the residential home buying market. But if you translate that more to commercial, like you said, co-working spaces and offices, as people are discovering that virtual technology, work from home works, and as some companies are saying we want to be prepared if any type of pandemic ever happens again, I've been hearing from companies that are saying, we don't want an expensive long-term lease on a physical office anymore. We're going to go to 3 days in a co-working space and 2 days at home every single week, or whatever it is. So I think you're going to see more people that don't want to have a full-time office with all their employees every day in the office, but they want to have a place to have meetings when employees need to get together and use more remote technology to do their work. So I think that you'll see an increase in that. By the same token, that I think that as people discover they can do more types of jobs and work using technology virtually, and they don't have to be at a company every day, I think that actually is a positive for the short-term rental market, because people will have more flexibility because they can be where they want to be. And if they want to move in 6 months, it doesn't matter where they live if they're not driving to the office. So people will look at short-term and lease and rental type accommodations for living so that they're not tied down to somebody once their company says you don't have to work in the office every day. I think those areas will have growth to a new type of customers, although clearly they'll lose some type of customers, the ones that don't want to be physically near anybody, no matter what.
Great. Super interesting. Can you tell us what would be your advice, or some of the measures that should be taken by the government and kind of ecosystem players to support startups within this context? What do you suggest for kind of ecosystem builders and governments?
Sure. So let's do governments first. And you see it here with the stimulus package in the U.S. is for citizens, but there's a small business and entrepreneurial package that's called the Paycheck Protection Plan, where our government, and the UK, I know, has done something like this, and I know people listening will know of things happening in countries they live in, But brand new government loan and assistance programs for startups and entrepreneurs. The one in the US has brand new terms, making it easier for startups to get access. Right now, it's survival. They're calling it the Paycheck Protection Program. It's survival money, but it'll be startup money in some cases too. But government's providing, and in the US, there's a loan forgiveness clause. So you don't even have to pay the low interest loan back if you meet certain criteria, which the criteria center around keeping our citizens employed. So government's implementing small business and entrepreneurial loan programs that have very loose terms is important, like the US and the UK is doing. Likewise, programs that the government approves that ease the burden, especially for the short-term future, of payments that people that, if you're a small business owner now, an entrepreneur with a small company not generating revenue, whether it's educational loans or mortgage payments that you have, being able to defer or give some kind of lenience. And sometimes that has to be government mandated before the financial entities will step into it. Like right now, one of the discussions is they're asking banks, if I loan this entrepreneur easy money, knowing I probably won't get it back, the banks are saying, do I have to report that on my balance sheet to the typical banking standards, or is the government willing to make exceptions and new laws and new regulations to allow financial institutions in your country to help out your small business owners without being penalized for it? So the government has a lot to do and can do a lot in helping. What was the second part of your question?
I think mainly it was governments and the ecosystem, how they can,
Yes.
what's needed from them. And you had started addressing really the government.
Yeah, so the ecosystem part, likewise, is, it was what ecosystems of startups were doing anyway, right? I am the chairman of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. For example, we have a thriving Saudi Arabia chapter called Gen Saudi. We have these chapters, in our case, of entrepreneurial ecosystem builders for the Global Entrepreneurship Network in 180 countries. What they're doing just became more important. They're doing the same thing, but what they've got to do is provide ecosystem builders have to provide more support services for startups, more access to each other. Right now, community is huge, because if you're a startup in any country sitting there alone suffering, what would help is if you could talk to all the other startups around you who are in the same boat and saying, who has some tips? How are you guys surviving this, and how can we help each other? Ecosystem builders need to provide not only mentors, people, Omar, like yourself, talking to startups and saying, here's some tips. And I've been trying to do that as much as I can. That's why I'm here with you today. Or the ecosystem builders providing virtual communities so these startups can share ideas and find ways that they can help each other.
Great. I have questions on two future of industries. The first, I have a couple of people who asked about construction and real estate development. And how do you repurpose a construction site? Or how will you complete construction, and how will this affect the construction and real estate industry? And I have another one which is focused on hospitality and restaurants, which are, of course, one of the heaviest hit by this crisis. And sure. Your thoughts on those two industries, maybe what opportunities there might be and where you think the sector might be going.
Sure. The unfortunately on the construction side, Omar, I have this crazy habit of not answering questions that I don't know the answer to. I know that sounds silly, but
that's totally fair.
I frequently see speakers that answer every question because they think I'm the speaker. They expect me to answer. And my friends have all heard me say this: if you don't know the answer, don't answer it. I'm not an expert in construction. I've seen a few repurpose because I've seen in some communities, so this is a small answer. I wish I had more, but I just don't know the business. I've seen some of the repurposing because what we have found, certainly in my country, is that our medical facilities were not equipped. We didn't have enough physical facility to handle all these patients. And so there are a lot of people contemplating the construction of these new sort of outsource. It's not the core hospital, but it's medical treatment and diagnosis centers and supply centers and a reconfiguration of the physical construction of how we provide healthcare to the people that physically do need it, the people that get the virus in this case. So I'm seeing some people looking at repurposing, and I'm seeing some people projecting that, you know, their core commercial projects and residential projects will come back when the economy comes back, but there's no escaping that it's just hurting now. There are a lot of people, to part of that question, that cannot find financing to restart their construction project and can't figure out how to repurpose. So it's going to hurt. That's really the only part of that one that I feel even a tiny bit qualified to answer. And I'm just repeating what I've heard from people in your industry.
The second industry that people were asking about was restaurants and hospitality.
Yes, so the opportunity for restaurants, a hard one and a soft one. The hard one is the number of restaurants, you know, that I've personally visited myself that never had delivery. They didn't have takeout, they didn't have delivery, they didn't have online ordering because they always had their customers. Their customers always came in. So, you know, the silver line, the bad news is obvious. They're getting devastated in the short term. But there's the silver lining. The good news is that there will be a higher percentage of people that are using takeout and delivery services for food than ever before, because they've never tried them before and they're finding out it's actually kind of nice in many cases. Whether they're, you know, during the virus they'll use it, but after it they'll use a percentage of it more than they ever did before. People want to go to restaurants, but they won't go all the time. If their favorite restaurant that never had takeout and never had delivery has it now, you won't have to go all the time. Before, you had no choice. So I think restaurants also were more limited a little bit to the geography around them and the customers that came to that restaurant. And when they add online ordering and they add themselves to delivery services, they can serve a lot more people. And by the way, you can serve them faster and at a higher profit margin through delivery service. I've been looking at some of the restaurants' numbers than it takes when they physically come in. And when they come in, you need a hostess, you need a whole restaurant on with the lights and the air conditioning on, you need people to clean the tables, and they sit there for an hour. When you're taking online orders, you can process 30 customers in an hour, and you don't have those physical expenses. So some restaurants are telling me my cost structure is going way down now that I have been able to develop online ordering and delivery services. That's good news for a lot of, I think for a lot of companies in the restaurant space. I just want to add one other thing that I'm hearing, and this is what I'm hearing from your restaurants customers. The restaurants that are redeploying, the restaurants that are saying, we've discovered that there are school children, I'm using an example, but it's a real one. School children in our community who used to get, you know, the biggest meal they got every day because they're low income was their school lunch, and now it's gone. And they're not eating well at home. I'm just giving that example. So kids that no longer have a free lunch at school, some restaurants are stepping up and saying, for every meal you buy, we're going to deliver 2 meals to children in the community or families that don't have enough food now. Or even if you don't buy something, they're just doing it anyway to help. What I'm saying is the community is going to remember which restaurants increased their prices for delivery and which restaurants gave away food to first responders and delivered a free meal to a low-income family every time you bought one. They're going to remember that. And after this is over, the restaurant owners that stepped up and proved they care about their community are going to be favored by consumers over the restaurants that increased prices or didn't do anything to help. I am hearing that from more and more people saying, let's help that restaurant because they're helping us.
Amazing. Jeff, there are altogether too many questions. I'm going to wrap up with one question of my own, to be honest, and it's just maybe a slightly philosophical one. Before that, we will definitely be sharing with you the questions. What would be the best way would you share the answers back with us to share with the team, or would you publish them somewhere? What would you suggest?
It's probably most efficient if I send answers back to you.
Beautiful.
And that way you can distribute them to everybody instead of me trying to find people one at a time. I would still like I said, that the email transcript of the chat, and people are welcome to email me directly, but the most efficient method is I'll answer what I can, send them back to you, Omar, and then you guys can post them, because then people will know where to go to Arabnet to get them.
Amazing. Wow, so many questions, goodness. Like I said, we have people asking about surveillance and cybersecurity trends. We have people asking about mergers and acquisitions, e-commerce, the furniture industry, the skill sets that need to be delivered. But with the limited time, I'm going to ask you today, I think that, and it is philosophical, I think the world has a kind of a choice. If we're going to deglobalize, entrench ourselves in our own countries and ourselves, or come together, integrate further and understand that cooperation is the outcome that is needed in a global a crisis and for the future. Where do you think you'll land? Are you optimistic that we will be better for this as a human race, that we will be more integrated and cooperative, or we will compete fiercer, we will entrench ourselves again, and we will deglobalize away from our previous trends?
So I am now, again, to be fair, I am an optimist by nature. That's why I became an entrepreneur, because I think things can get done, not reasons why they can't. So I am an optimist, but fortunately, especially in my role as the chairman of GEN, I speak to people all over the world pretty much every day. And so, and I've been doing calls like this. I've been doing Zoom calls where there's 20, 30 countries connected at once. I am thrilled, actually, to say that what I am hearing is a coming together in a way that we never have before. What this virus showed us, again, focusing on the silver lining, clearly thousands of people worldwide are dying and it's horrible. But you have to look for what positive can we draw from a horrible negative. And a positive is, this has reminded everybody that in the end, we are one human family. This is one big global human race. And even though, like you said, we were separated into all our little geographical, ethnic, whatever, political boundaries and regions, I am seeing people all over the world saying, how do we help each other? Because we're all in it together. This pandemic reminded us that we're all in this together.
But
right?
don't you see the other side as well? People saying states fighting for ventilators, countries closing borders, just to push just a little bit, further on this. Don't you see a retrenchment? People putting themselves as well, caring about their own survival as they are brought into this very difficult time?
Yes, but I'm going to blame more of that on governments that are making a lot of these decisions. They have to protect borders and stuff. You're right, and there are people's behavior. Every one of us knows this. It's been to a grocery store. There's somebody that's behaving horribly. They're trying to take all of one product and buy all of it for themselves. Physically, the way they're behaving about anybody being near them, or, imagine if you clear your throat or cough in a public place, you might get, beaten these days. So you are correct. There's a lot of bad behavior. But what I still have to say, what I'm seeing coming out from under it is, I think we will find that the bad behavior makes the news, but it's the minority of people. What I'm starting to hear is more people standing up against the bad behavior and saying, hey, don't take the entire supply of toilet paper. Let's all buy some, and let's find some people who couldn't get any, or whatever the supply is, water, hand sanitizer. I'm starting to see that this bad behavior is causing the good people to rise up and say, I'm embarrassed by the behavior of a lot of human beings right now, and we shouldn't be like this. So I think the bad examples, I tell you this, I've been doing youth stuff, working with youth around the world, and the kids are appalled at the bad self-serving, selfish behavior of adults. And the kids are saying, why are people doing that instead of helping? So this is absolutely a time you should be talking to your children and saying that behavior is wrong and unacceptable. And this is a time where we look out for each other and try to help each other. I am still going to keep, Omar, the optimistic belief that the good will shine through as soon as people get sick of the bad, and the bad is pretty noisy out there right now.
And on that very optimistic note, thank you. I hope that everyone from our audience, I tried to get through as many questions as we could, and I hope that you got some insights. Thank you, Jeff, so much for your time. Sure. Really appreciate your willingness to share this and your insights, and it's so much in line with what you're saying about our willingness all to take the time and support each other. And we look forward to catching up again with you soon. Thank you to our audience, and best of luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, Omar, just have somebody send me. Well, that was a nice comment from someone. If you could, somebody, I'm not logging off because I want to make sure someone captures this, because that's how it works, right? You save the chat.
Yes, I'm not sure if people can still hear us. I think
Okay,
maybe
well,
they
that's
can.
okay. I'm just, that's all I was asking.
just giving you the heads up.
Sure, if someone can save that chat and send it to me, I would love to go through this. And I appreciate not only questions, yes, people are still there. So let me say this to people that can still hear us. It's not just your questions, but I'm going to ask you for a personal ask. Feedback's important, and honest feedback. If the stuff that I'm telling you is useful and helpful, tell me that. If it's not and you don't agree or it doesn't make sense, I need to hear those opinions too, because Omar and I and Arabnet and my team at Gen, all of us are just trying to help. So if we're not being helpful, someone needs to tell us that. And if we are, let us know so we can continue doing it. So I just wanted to give that ask that your feedback is important as well. Thank you, everybody. I got to run.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Omar.
Take care.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and your questions.